Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brooke, and I am the outreach coordinator for a nonprofit based here in Charleston, South Carolina called Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network. So, our whole mission with Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network is to protect our local marine mammals for future generations. And we do this through quality science, public outreach, and conserving of their environment. So, today we are going to talk all about marine mammals and how humans impact their lives. But first, let's quickly go over what makes a marine mammal a mammal. Now, there are a lot of different characteristics that they have that we have too, right? Because we are mammals. And so I want you all to put your thinking caps on and start to think what makes you a mammal. So, the first thing that makes mammals different from other animals is the fact that they have hair or fur. So, let's think of all the hair that we have on our head and how that differs or looks the same as some of our other marine mammal friends. And so we've got all these cute little furry faces. We've got our California sea otter on our left hand side here. They've got the thickest fur of any known animal, helps keep them nice and warm. We've got our walrus in the middle who live in really, really cold environments. And then we have our California sea lion off here to the right hand side. So you can see, even amongst those three different animals, they have different lengths of hair, different thicknesses of hair. But then when we think about other marine mammals like our dolphins and our whales, they don't really have those thick pelts. Instead, they have little whiskers. So for dolphins, for example, they have little whiskers on their upper nose or their rostrum for the first several weeks of their life. Then eventually they shed that hair so they can become even more streamlined in the water so they don't have as much drag. And then let's look at this humpback whale over to the right hand side. You can see there are all these big old bumps on top of its head. And each of those bumps is an enlarged pore, and each enlarged pore has a little whiskers. So even dolphins and whales have hair, although it looks a lot slimmer than our sea otter friends. The next thing that makes mammals mammals is the fact that they are warm blooded. And so when we're thinking about how we stay warm or, compare that to something like a turtle, turtles will stay out in the sun all day to regulate their own body temperature and to get the energy they need in order to go hunt or to swim or to get away from a predator. But us humans, we don't, or us mammals, we don't have to sit in the sun all day in order to get energy. Instead, all mammals are warm blooded. So that means they have this ability to regulate their own body temperature. Now, we did just talk about hair, and hair definitely does help keep a lot of our mammal friends nice and warm, also. And a lot of marine mammals have this thing called blubber, which is this really thick, fatty layer that hangs out under the skin on top of the muscle. And that definitely helps keep them regulated as well. The other thing that a lot of mammals have are these extra areas of blood vessels. For something like a dolphin, they have extra blood vessels in their flippers, their fluke, and their dorsal fin. For us humans, we have the extras in our hands and our feet and on our head. So that means when it's really cold outside, something that we as humans like to do is maybe put on a pair of socks or a hat and maybe some mittens. And when we're really, really toasty, we might remove all those things. That's because we have those extra blood vessels there. So that's pretty much the same for our dolphins and our whales. All right, the next thing that makes mammals mammals is the fact that they breathe air. We all breathe air, and we breathe air with our lungs. And so that means, for our marine mammal friends, they have to come up to the surface and get that breath of air instead of something like a shark or another type of fish who have gills and they can stay in the water the whole time. So, for our dolphins and our whales, the animals that spend their entire life in an ocean underwater, they have their nostrils on top of their head. So, you can see that in these two pictures, there's this big old hole on top of their head that we call their blowhole. And this hole on top of their head helps keep them really streamlined. So instead of coming up to the surface and putting their whole face out of the water, if they had, nostrils on the end of their nose, like a walrus or a sea lion or a dog, they would have to put their whole face out of the water every time. They would also have to stop swimming, and that would expose them to predation and waste a lot of energy. So having these nostrils on top of their head instead of in front of their nose makes it so that they can barely surface, take a breath of air, and continue on their way. They don't have to stop. They don't have to expose themselves to anything. And so again, we call those head nostrils a blowhole. The other cool thing about animals who are living in the ocean, who are mammals, is they have to remember to breathe. So that means they have to come up to the surface and take that breath of air at a certain time. Versus humans, we are unconscious breathers. So that means we can fall asleep and we don't have to worry about our breathing patterns. So that's pretty interesting for an animal that lives in the ocean. They have to remember to come up to the surface to take a breath. All right, let's think about our bodies as mammals and what we use to walk around, or marine mammals, what they use to swim. So we are going to feel our backbones together, and you might notice that there are little bumps kind of along our spine. And so each of those bumps is called a vertebrae. So we as mammals have these throughout our body, and that's why we are called vertebrates versus an invertebrate like a sea urchin or a starfish or a slug. All those animals, they don't have this structure in their body. And so these vertebrae, they connect to create the backbone of our bodies. And so for a dolphin, they have a vertebrae starting, right at the back of their neck, and it goes all the way down to their tail. And these vertebrae give them structure so that they can swim, so that they can hunt, so that they can find their friends, gives them the ability to move around. And so let's pretend for a second that we are mammals and we don't have any vertebrae, we don't have any bones. It would be very difficult to do all of those things like hunting, swimming, for us as humans, walking. We'd basically just be jellyfish. And so without these vertebrae, we have a harder time being a good mammal in our environment. All right, the next thing that makes mammals mammals is the fact that they have live birth. So when we think about how we were born, we can pretty safely say that we didn't come from an egg like our little sea turtle friends. Instead, our moms grew us in their womb. For humans, it's 9 months, but for a dolphin, it's 12 months. And for a lot of other whales, sometimes it's over a year and a half. And so what's really amazing about this is there's this bonding that occurs between a mom and her calf. And this bond is so strong so that even after the baby is born, the mom is dedicating its first 3 to 5 years, sometimes 6 years, with this calf and teaching it how to swim, teaching it how to communicate, teaching it how to hunt. And so let's look at this picture right in front. We can see a little baby dolphin, a little neonate is what we call those. And you can see these lines are on the body of the dolphin. And so those lines are formed because when a dolphin is in the womb of a mom, it's all curled up like that. And so we as scientists, if we see an animal with these lines on their back just like that, we can tell it's a newborn. And over time, it will start to fade. But how cool is that? All right, the next thing that makes marine mammals mammals is after a baby is born, mammals, female mammals, have the ability to produce milk through what we call mammary glands. For our lady dolphins, we actually call them mammary slits. And so here's a picture of one of our dolphins that lives here locally in the Kiowa River. Her name is Koko. And you can see her underbelly is swollen and pink, and you can see those little mammary slits, which is where the baby calf would get their milk. So quick anatomy lesson. If we look over on this right-hand side, we have two pictures of dolphins. This one on the furthest right side is of a male dolphin. So if this were a male dolphin, we could look at the underbelly and see three lines kind of in a row. And so that first line is the umbilicus, or the belly button of an animal. They have their genital slit and their anus. So the female is going to have all of those same things, but remember, females have babies and produce milk. So they have those mammary slits on either side of that genital slit. And then the baby dolphin can nuzzle its rostrum, again, its nose, right into that area. And it actually has a specialized tongue that attaches to that internal nipple so that the mom can continue to swim and the calf can continue to swim while also nursing, which is pretty cool. So the specialized tongue, it's basically, it looks like a hairy tongue. It allows for extra grip onto the internal nipple. And eventually that fades after they stop breastfeeding. All right. So going over this one more time, what makes a marine mammal a mammal? We have hair and fur. We are warm-blooded. We breathe with lungs. We have vertebrae, so we are vertebrates. We produce live birth and maternal care, and all mammals have mammary glands. All right, so now that we know what makes a mammal, let's talk about some of the types that we see on our planet. So we have this really nice diagram created by an artist, and they have laid out all these different categories. So the first category are our mustelids, and that is our sea otters and other types of marine otters. We have Ursidae, which are our polar bears. We have this group called pinnipeds, which are our walruses, our sea lions, and our seals. We have Sirenians, which are made up of dugongs and manatees. And then our last group is the largest by far, and it is cetaceans. So this group is made up of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And it's such a large group. There's 89 different species that we know of. It's such a large group that we've actually broken it up into kind of two subcategories, if you will. And so some of those animals in this group have teeth. So that would include animals like our orcas, our bottlenose dolphins, or sperm whales. And any animal that has teeth, we call an odontocete. I always like to think they go to the orthodontist. Then we have this other group in there who don't have teeth, and instead they are filter feeding some of the smallest things on our planet. And so those animals, instead of teeth, they have something called baleen, which are these fiber-like plates that hang down in the animal. And if anybody's ever seen Finding Nemo, you might remember the scene where Dory and Marlin get swallowed up by a big old whale, and Marlin's throwing his body against some hairy-looking thing hanging down in the mouth of the whale. And that hairy thing is baleen. So they're able to expand their lower throat. So if you look at this picture of the humpback whale, you can see those lines on their throat. We call those throat grooves. And they're able to expand that lower area and engulf a ton of water. And once they have that water, they start to push that water back out through their baleen, or those filters. And they're collecting the smallest critters on our planet. So our krills, our other planktonic critters, and they will eat tons of these small animals every single day. This is pretty neat because when we think about the largest animal on our planet, which are our mighty blue whales, they are eating the smallest things found on our planet, our krill, which is pretty crazy. All right, so we are going to talk about how humans interact with our marine mammals. And specifically, we're going to talk about the negative impacts of human impact and some of the good stuff that we as humans have done, like conservation work. So here in South Carolina, we see anywhere from 50 to 85 marine mammals strand every single year. So a stranding refers to an animal who is sick, injured, or has already passed away. And so we, Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network, we partner with NOAA and have created together the South Carolina Marine Mammal Stranding Network. So we respond to all of these cases up and down the entire coastline of South Carolina together. And we are assessing what's going on. A lot of times we're seeing that humans are the cause of death. Oftentimes too, there's, totally natural causes, but we can't ignore that almost every animal we've responded to and done what we call a necropsy on, which is basically a big dissection. Almost every single one for the past 5+ years has had some sort of human impact. So specifically, it's had microplastics in their intestines. We've seen boat strikes. We've seen entanglements. We've seen shattered eardrums because of sonar testing and boat noise. So we're going to dive into that today. But today, specifically, we are going to cover 3 main human impacts, and that includes human interaction, plastic pollution, and shipping traffic. All right, so the first we're going to talk about is human interaction. Specifically, what I mean by human interaction is people getting really close to these animals and having some sort of activity that they're doing that might disrupt this natural behavior that an animal would normally be doing. And so in this picture, you are seeing that a woman is reaching off the boat. She's trying to touch this dolphin or this whale, which is an illegal act in itself because marine mammals are federally protected. And we'll dive into more of that later. We also see that a lot of people try to feed dolphins. Again, super illegal. NOAA recommends keeping a distance of 50 yards. So to not chase the animal, not to try to touch the animal, not to feed the animal. So these two pictures are of begging dolphins. And so what happens is as we as humans are interacting with them and feeding them, even if it's something that they would normally eat, like a fish, it starts to create this really bad behavior that we call begging. And so when we think about our dogs or any wildlife in general, the moment you start to feed them as humans, they start to depend on you and rely on you as a food source. The issue is that as these animals are learning to beg, they're spending a lot more time around boats, which can definitely lead to boat strikes, entanglements, more noise around them, and they're spending less and less time doing their natural feeding behaviors. We've seen this taken huge leaps to where a mom will actually teach their calf how to beg. And so they're not learning how to be a normal dolphin. Instead, they are waiting around, putting on a cute face for humans. And so, even though these animals are so cute and they look like they're smiling at you, it is so important that we ignore them so that these animals can remain wild. So, to help us reverse this behavior, just ignore the dolphins. Don't try to touch them, don't feed them, don't engage with them. You can turn your boat into neutral and just sit and watch them for a little bit. But again, don't try to approach them in any manner. The best thing to do if they continue to beg is just to leave the area. We also see that people are getting too close in other ways. So we have this picture over to the left, which is some of our dolphins who do this really amazing behavior called strand feeding. We get to see it here pretty regularly in the low country. And it's basically where dolphins are working together to capture their prey and then they force it up onto the beach. Then those dolphins beach themselves to capture this food. And it's a really amazing behavior. Again, it's super unique, but we're seeing that more and more people are trying to interact with it. So in this photo, you can see this guy has gotten really close to the dolphin. We've had incidents of people taking the fish that these dolphins just spent a lot of energy to throw up onto the beach. So humans are taking the fish and trying to feed them with it, which is super disruptive. We've also seen a lot of other occurrences of people trying to ride the fish or throwing, or not the fish, ride the dolphin or trying to throw stuff at the dolphin. All of those things, again, are super disruptive to this animal. And likely, if it continues, we aren't going to be able to see this behavior much longer. This other photo is taken in Monterey, where we can see a lot of kayakers have gotten really close to a whale. I'm sure it was a cool experience, maybe a little scary, but the reality is we are not meant to interact with them in this way. It's scary for them. We're coming over, we're not able to communicate with them and give them a heads up of where we're going. And so it can be really disorienting to these animals and make them feel threatened. But it's also really, really dangerous for humans. So because these animals are mammals, they carry a lot of diseases that affect us as humans. We call those zoonotic diseases. And so touching them or getting too close to them, if they, breathe on us, we are potentially exposing ourselves to something very harmful. So, like I said, marine mammals are federally protected, and they are protected under something called the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So, this act was established in 1972, and it defines two different levels of harassment. So, level A means that you're actively pursuing this animal, you're trying to annoy it, you're trying to torment it. Anything that you are doing that has a potential to injure a marine mammal or alter the behavior. The next level of harassment is a level B, and this refers to the act of potentially disrupting an animal, but not necessarily injuring it. And so this could include, interacting in a way where our boats are disrupting their migration pattern, or we're zooming back and forth over them in our boat, and it's causing it to be difficult for them to surface to take a breath. So anything that could disrupt them. The thing with this is if you are caught breaking the Marine Mammal Protection Act, you are looking up to $100,000 in fines as well as jail time. So this is a very, very serious penalty, and it is not worth touching a dolphin for. Okay, so the next issue we are going to talk about is plastic pollution. There is a lot of plastic on our planet, and we as humans rely on plastic for a lot of different things. It's in our shoes, it's in our sunglasses, it's got fibers in a lot of our clothes, it's in our cars, it's in our bikes. And so it's kind of, an important basis for human life at this point. However, when we're talking about plastic waste, I really want to hone in on single use plastics and how dangerous they are. It's unrealistic for me to say stop using plastics altogether because, like I said, they are so integrated into our lifestyle. But we can definitely cut out single use plastic. So I have this diagram over to the right hand side, and it has some of our most commonly used items and shows somewhat of a timeline for how long they're going to be around on our planet. Now, this picture to our left hand side is a picture from 1955. This was an article published by Life, and it's called Throwaway Living. Now, 1955 was a really important time for the United States. We had just finished a huge war. Our men are now coming back home. Our women had experienced, going and working outside of the kitchen for the first time in their lives. And there was this really interesting dynamic shift in our culture. So, like I said, women were working in these factories, but now their men are coming back home. Their families are back and reunited for many of them. And this idea for women going back to the kitchen did not sound very appealing because they wanted to, now utilize these new skills that they had after working in the factories, but they also wanted to spend time with their families that had been, separated for so long. And so instead of spending time in the kitchen cooking and cleaning, plastics had made its way into the single use platform for one of the more historical first times we have seen. And so instead of cooking and cleaning and using our ceramic or our china, now we have these disposable items that we can utilize once and throw away. Plastic utensils, plastic cups, plastic trays, plastic plates. And this was really attractive for these families. But in 1955, we had no idea that these seemingly single use items that were making life so much easier for these people were actually going to cause a problem years and years down the line. Because again, these plastics stick around for a lot longer than we anticipated. So back to this diagram over on our right hand side, we can see that something as simple as a plastic water bottle that many, many people use just one time a day and throw away can be on our planet for up to 450 years. Now, this number might be not super accurate because we're starting to learn that plastic sticks around even longer than that. And instead, it's just breaking up into smaller and smaller microscopic pieces that the human eye cannot see. And so, switching over to styrofoam, this is by far the most dangerous item we have on our planet because it supposedly sticks around forever. Forever. That's a long time. We as humans might live upwards of 100 years, and this styrofoam is going to be here for all of the generations after us. That is crazy and super scary. We also see that plastics have this part in entangling animals. So getting stuck on their fluke, like this picture to the right, or just entrapping their whole body, like this picture to the left-hand side. And so sometimes, it causes death, which we'll see in the next slide. And sometimes it just slows that animal down and exhausts them until they can't fight predators or until they can't find food to support all that energy that they're wasting. And so globally, it is estimated that 300,000 whales, dolphins, and porpoises die every year from entanglements in ocean trash and fishing gear. Now, we can only assume that for every entangled whale reported, approximately 10 more go unreported. So we're going to talk about some solutions to this, but one of the solutions might just be ropeless fishing and ghost net recovery. The other way that fishing gear ends up in our waters is something called ghost nets, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we see that about 15% of all of the plastics in our ocean is due to fishing gear. And so realistically, this number looks like 100,000 tons. That is so much waste. And we're seeing that, it's getting stuck around a whole body of animal, or maybe it traps it underwater so it can't get to the surface. We're seeing it around necks. We're seeing it around flukes and flippers. And it will leave these indentations that are permanent and sometimes can cause death, like this picture to the right-hand side. So ghost nets are these abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing nets. And so, like I mentioned, they are responsible for trapping and killing a significant number of marine mammals on our planet. And so we have this diagram of ghost fishing and how it has this destructive cycle. So we can see that a fishing net may have been abandoned or lost at sea, maybe cut off because they got stuck on something. And we're seeing that this can impact the environment, like getting stuck in coral reef systems or in kelp forests, or it can directly impact an animal and can rack them up, killing that whole group of animal that is caught in the net. And then once those animals end up at the very bottom, that plastic is re-released as scavengers start to feed on the carcass. They're slowly removing it from the net. And so then that free floating plastic can go back and impact even more animals. But this is where humans come in. So we have the opportunity to break the cycle. We can collect that trash and get it out of our oceans so that less animals are impacted by at least that piece of trash. We also see that plastic is getting ingested by a lot of animals. And so we see that marine debris ingestion occurs in over 1,400 species, of which marine mammals, sea turtles, and seabirds are all very well represented. So we're seeing that in almost every marine mammal that we know of, it has been reported at some point in time that they have it either in their intestines or their stomach. And every year, the number is just getting bigger and bigger. So nearly every necropsy, which is an animal dissection that we do here in South Carolina, has some sort of plastic internally. And oftentimes you're, not like a whole water bottle is ending up in these animals, but instead it's these teeny tiny plastics that we're going to talk about in a second. And so marine debris or plastic ingestion can happen because of mistaken identity. So sea turtles are a really famous example of this. Sometimes as a plastic bag is floating through the water, sea turtles might see that as one of their favorite snacks, the jellyfish. And sometimes that plastic is in the food that these animals are going after. Or sometimes these animals are getting big gulps of food and it just happens to be in the rest of their prey. And so it's unintentionally ingested. So plastics break down over time. And so it's not that they just disappear, it's that they're getting smaller and smaller. And at a certain point, they will be hard for us to see as humans without a microscope. And so we can see that over time, they can get smaller than 5 millimeters. And like I said, sometimes this is unintentional. Sometimes as these different animals are doing their normal feeding strategies, that plastic is just in the way. So for something like a humpback whale or a baleen whale who is surfacing or lunging towards the surface to get their fish, it can be scattered throughout their prey's body and it can just be free floating. So as they're filter feeding, they're getting it caught in their baleen. We're also seeing it, as animals are chasing their prey and going after their food, they can also scoop up that plastic too. And of course, our bottom feeders can get it just because of the accumulation on the floor and for the animals that already have them in their belly. So let's talk really quickly about this concept called bioaccumulation. This is a pretty scary concept, but basically it shows that one piece of trash, one piece of plastic can impact multiple animals. So we'll start right here at the front at number 1. And so we see that there's some trash floating at the surface, and we have some zooplankton. And most of the time, this trash is not going to be a fork. A little plankton is not going to ingest an entire fork, but rather they're going to ingest teeny tiny pieces of that fork, for example. And so that plastic has now been ingested by these little critters. And now we move on to number 2. The bigger thing eats the plankton. So we have a fish here that now has eaten that plankton. And so now that plastic has impacted not 1, but 2 animals. And then a bigger fish comes along and eats that fish. And so now that plastic is in 1, 2, 3 bodies. And guess what? We as humans also are in this diagram. Sometimes we eat the big fish. And so now that plastic has ended up in our bellies, impacting a total of 4 animals. But that's not the end, right? Because after we have pooped out that plastic, if we do, it's just re-entered into the system for another animal or several animals to be impacted by it. The next concept we're going to talk about is shipping traffic. So we see specifically boat strikes happen a lot. According to research carried out by a nonprofit called Friend of the Sea, ship strikes kill more than 20,000 whales every year. 20,000! This is an alarming number, especially considering how close to extinction some species are, like our North Atlantic right whales. This is heartbreaking, and this is only what's reported, so we can guess that this number is much, much bigger. We also see ship strikes happen, and they are getting too close with their propeller. So if an animal isn't, completely hit by the boat, we might see that just the propeller is slashing up the insides of our animals. And this is a really common thing that we see with our bigger whales. And so we have a dolphin over here to the left who has all these propeller strikes. You can see it went past the skin, past the blubber, past the muscle, and is now exposing its internal organs. Now, for some whales, they can totally live through a boat strike. And I remember hearing a statistic at one point, which was really scary, saying almost, I think it was 1 in 3, don't quote me, but 1 in 3 whales will be hit by a boat at some point in their life and often survive through it. But then eventually, if they get hit and hit and hit again, they will die. And sometimes one shot is all it takes as well. So we have this really interesting video. It's showcasing some of the shipping vessels that are storming through blue whale feeding grounds in northern Patagonia every single day. And so you can see the little blue is the whale, and the red is our shipping traffic. And so just imagine for a second that you are that whale. How disorienting would that be to try to, dodge these ships that are passing through left and right? But also let's think about all the noise that it's making. And so many of these animals, they communicate through noise, and noise passes a lot faster in the ocean than it does on land and air. And so I can only imagine how scary this would be for a whale and how difficult it would be to live life just like that. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is noise pollution. So like I just mentioned, sound travels way faster in water. In fact, it's 4 times faster in water than in air. And so this impacts our cetacean friends the most because their primary communication is using echolocation, which are clicks and squeaks and eeks. So here's a picture kind of showcasing how echolocation works. So they have this fatty membrane in front of their head, which we call a melon, and they're able to use these sonar frequencies, like our dolphins and our other toothed whales, to send out the signal. And so basically, echolocation allows these animals to see by interpreting the echoes of sound waves that bounce off of objects near them in the water. So to echolocate objects nearby, dolphins produce this high frequency set of clicks or squeaks or whistles. That sound then leaves the melon through their mouth, through their audio, hits the thing in the water, so either another dolphin or a shark or a fish, and then the sound waves travel back and hits them in their lower jaw. That's where they receive that echo, and then they're able to make sense of it with their brain. So this information is passed through the brain via the inner ear. So pretty interesting. Echolocation is not just used by our marine animals, bats also use it. And so again, they're utilizing this melon to create these vibrations, these sound waves that are sent out, bounce off an object of interest, and are received through the lower jaw. So unfortunately, because boats make a lot of noise and because our dolphins and our whales rely on sounds to communicate, we're seeing that shipping traffic is making things really difficult to be a whale and a dolphin in our ocean. So as shipping traffic gets busier on top, the noise down below becomes deafening, disorienting cetaceans all over the world. So let's watch this quick video.
Cetaceans have lived in our oceans for millions of years. The smallest one, the Hector's dolphin, is about 20 times smaller than the blue whale, the largest living organism on Earth. Its heart is so big that a person could almost stand in it. Cetaceans find their way even in darkest ocean depths. They emit calls and detect obstacles and prey from the reflected echoes. Cetaceans often communicate with each other. They stay in touch by calling to each other when spread out and likely exchanging information on the occurrence of prey or predators. Some species can only reproduce because they can communicate over hundreds of kilometers and thus find each other. But underwater noise is increasingly masking the acoustic world of cetaceans. Noise levels in the oceans have doubled every decade for the past 60 years in some areas due to various human activities. Without countermeasures, underwater noise will further increase. Over 90% of world trade is transported by ship. Ship propellers generate intense noise. Cetaceans are exposed to ever-present noise in major shipping routes. Once a ship has passed, another will follow shortly. Chronic noise causes stress, which in turn affects the health of cetaceans and may also reduce their breeding success. Whales are acutely threatened during military exercises when warships turn on their sonar. The extremely loud sonar sounds spread for tens to hundreds of miles in all directions and are used to detect submarines. Whales appear to change their diving behavior in panic to escape the noise. This seems to cause divers' bends or decompression sickness, affecting vital organs, which can lead to death. Some fatally injured or dead animals beach on the shore, but many die unnoticed in the open sea and sink. The noise caused by seismic exploration for oil and gas is also loud, pervasive, and continuous. During the ship surveys, seismic air guns produce intense pulsed noise every few seconds, often for weeks or months. Air gun pulses are so loud that they can travel through thousands of meters of water and penetrate tens to hundreds of kilometers into the Earth's crust. The echo reverberates from oil and gas deposits all the way back to the measuring devices at the surface. The noise can cause the marine environment to be heavily degraded over large areas, forcing some marine life to abandon their habitat. Thus, the livelihood of cetaceans may be destroyed, and so their life. Underwater noise pollution is a serious threat to marine life. Together, we can change this situation. We call for a global strategy to reduce underwater noise pollution and ask for marine protected areas where noisy activities are not allowed. Support our worldwide campaign against underwater noise pollution. Become a part of Silent Oceans.
All right, so all of this noise means that it's stressing and impairing the animal's immune system, which makes them more and more susceptible to disease in general. And ocean noise also causes marine mammals to flee and abandon valuable habitats, either because of direct impact or because they have to follow their fleeing prey. And as this video showcased, this can disorient them, this can lead to death, this can lead to beaching. And a lot of times the animals that we see have washed up with shattered eardrums. But as this video also said, there is hope. We as humans can do something different to help keep our oceans more quiet. And so, with that, let's talk about conservation. And so, we see conservation impacting animals all over the place. Basically, conservation is us as humans coming together and stepping up and saying, we want to protect these animals, or we want to protect these trees, this forest, so that they're around for future generations, so that they don't go extinct. So let's really quickly look at some examples. So, what happens when these animals go extinct? What happens if conservation is not happening? So, really quick, again, let's define conservation. It's defined as protecting animals, plants, and environments that we love so that they are around for tomorrow. And it's important because if we don't, then they can impact entire ecosystems. So let's go back to our example, the northern right whale. There are less than 400 northern right whales estimated to be alive today, and only 100 of those are breeding females. Now let's think about the vaquita. There are only thought to be 10 left on our planet, and that number might be smaller today. So without some conservation efforts, without us as humans changing our choices, whether it's our shopping choices or our political decisions, and saying, hey guys, we need to protect these animals, either by creating no wake zones, by changing our shipping traffic, by having more people on the ground educating our community. Without those changes, without these real changes, these animals can go extinct, and they can impact an entire food web because these are top predators in their environment. And so, as top predators, they have these profound effects throughout the entire ecosystem. They influence the structure of ecosystems, and they control the distribution, abundance, and diversity of their prey. They regulate lower species in the food chain, an effect that we as scientists call trophic cascades. So you can see if this polar bear, for example, were removed, then probably the seal population would go up and be all out of whack, and that would impact the killer whales, the walruses, the narwhals, the Arctic cod, the fauna, the seabirds, the phytoplankton. All of those things would no longer be in a balance without the polar bear or without the killer whale. Those are also really important top predators. We can think about this with another animal like our sharks. Sharks are top predators in their environment as well. And they play this really important role of regulating the food chain by eating the sick and dying or injured fish that are there. And so without the sharks, they have all these sick fish just going around, impacting more and more animals. And as those sick fish become sicker, impacting other animals and dying off, that means a whole other population of species is now either booming or just completely out of whack. And so we need these top predators to stay in place so that the whole ecosystem can stay in balance. We as humans rely on this ecosystem for food, for oxygen, for recreation, for medicine, the list goes on. So one of the solutions I mentioned earlier could just be ropeless fishing. So ropeless fishing is this idea of fishing without rope. Crazy. So the idea is that these boxes are deployed, these fishing boxes are deployed by the boat. They're not attached to that at all. They're able to collect fish just by sitting on the bottom, and whales and other animals can swim freely over them. They're not getting entangled in those nets. And once the boat is ready to pick up their traps, they're able to send a signal down telling the trap to release a buoy that will float everything up to the surface. And then instantaneously, that boat can then collect all of its traps, again, without having this excess rope, without entangling any whales. So it's a really, really cool concept being put out there by a team of amazing researchers. And now it sounds like all we need is more funding and more ships to transition over to this new way of fishing. There's a lot of other ways that we can protect marine mammals right at home. So if you're somebody who spends a lot of time on the water on a boat, then we can do our part to put our boats into neutral if we come across a marine mammal. We can also avoid following the animal. We can avoid touching or feeding or attempting to feed marine mammals because, again, it's super illegal. We can do our part to keep our distance. So, whether we're on a boat or on shore, if we're seeing an animal come close, we can say, hey, we're going to stay back, let them do their thing. There's also things that we can do by supporting conservation actions. And so that can be in the polls if you're of voting age, or you can make votes by things that you're purchasing. So every time you go to a store, you can purchase an item that is good and sustainable for our ocean. And that tells our grocery stores or our stores in general that we want to see more of that product. And so the less that we're buying things, that tells the stores that they can purchase less and less of that because less of their community is relying on that item. We can also write to our local representatives and say, hey, we really care about whales and dolphins or whatever animal it is in your backyard. And you can ask them to step up and do something to protect them. You can also do your part to keep your home green. And so that could be turning the lights off when you're not using them, taking shorter showers, turning the water off when you're brushing your teeth. You can reduce, reuse, recycle. You can choose sustainable products, like I said. So things like this straw kit that comes in a cool burlap bag. It's got stainless steel straws and a straw tip. You can get reusable water bottles, take reusable bags to the grocery store. The list goes on. There's really a lot of cool reusable products out there. And then if it's safe, you can pick up trash and discard of it in the proper receptacle, excuse me. And then you can educate your friends and your family about how important it is to do all of these things. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is Brooke, which is spelled Brooke, and then at L as in low country, M as in marine, another M as in mammal, and N as in network.org. Thanks, guys.